Welcome back. Before the break, we were looking into the Harry Potter characters that work in the bank and debating whether or not these are purposeful anti-Semitic characters, accidental anti-Semitic characters, and the best way that I like to go is looking at the original source. So I'm looking at the original book, which is the J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or Philosopher's Stone, depending on which version you have. And the first description that we get of these goblin characters that work in the bank is as follows. The goblin was about a head shorter than Harry. He had a swarthy, clever face, a pointed beard, and Harry noticed very long fingers and feet. Following this was the character Hagrid mentioning, quote, "Like I said, you'd be mad to rob it," speaking about the bank. About 100 more goblins were sitting on high stools behind a long counter, scribbling in large ledgers, weighing coins and brass scales, examining precious stones through their glasses. As you can see, there's not a huge description here of these characters. It's actually quite limited to what it says in the book, which would require the filmmakers, of course, to visualize these characters themselves. I was kind of thinking I would look into the other books to see if maybe the filmmakers stole some of their ideas from later books. It's very limited what we see online in regards to how these characters are described, although it is interesting that I found on a few wiki fan pages, the Hagrid character speaks about how safe these banks are, and he is quoted on these wiki sites as saying that goblins are extremely greedy and would protect their money and valuables at any cost, which make them ideal guardians for the valuables in the wizarding world. The goblins have a code that forbids them to speak of their bank secrets and consider it base treachery to break any part of that code. This I found was a little disturbing. I have yet to find anywhere that cites where this passage is from. This appears to not come from the books. This is someone who has offered this opinion, it seems, and then it is spread along the internet. But this one definitely starts to fall into the idea of anti-Semitic tropes and the fact that they are seen as greedy and protect their money at any cost. These are definitely falling into the anti-Semitic ideas that we would see Jon Stewart refer to. However, of course, this doesn't come from the book itself, so we can't blame J.K. Rowling or the filmmakers for this. This is just something that seems to have taken on its own strange anti-Semitic ideas online outside of the book on the wiki fan pages of Harry Potter. So it seems like we've established the idea that J.K. Rowling really didn't give a description to suggest what they would look like, and that would be left to the filmmakers, someone like Chris Columbus, the director of the movie. What I find is very interesting about the choices made by the filmmakers, of course, is just like Jon Stewart pointed out, the very oddly stereotypical portrayals of Jewish people coming from the anti-Semitic Protocols of Zion, along with World War II Nazi propaganda, with the very pointy noses and the glasses and the typical things we see in anti-Semitism. This is definitely a little bit disturbing, but I'm actually going to go in some little bit of a deeper dive into some of the stereotypes that may be playing here that the filmmakers were unaware of. In doing some research, it seems like the story suggests these goblins have been working in this bank since around the 1400s, and these goblins, for some reason, are wearing a very unique set of clothing. One could imagine that possibly the bankers would wear similar clothing to everyone else around, because that would be the times that they're living in. They would wear whatever the times call for. However, they are definitely wearing unique clothing if you look back at some of the photos or the clips from the movie. You'd imagine they'd be wearing clothing of their old school traditions and customs, but that doesn't seem to make much sense either. If you think about 1400s clothing, you can imagine something a little bit more on the line of Shakespearean clothing. You can imagine the long caped clothing. Instead, we seem to find them a little bit more in a traditional 1700s wear, maybe a little bit more frills around the neck and big collars and suits. The era that they're probably wearing their clothing from seems to fit a little bit more about the time of the Jewish bankers, the Rothschilds. This was a very wealthy family we'll get into a little bit later, and I challenge you to go online and take a look at some of the Rothschilds, the original ones from Europe and England, and you'll see that the clothing they're wearing and even the hairstyles and things like that are very similar to some of these characters in this film. Now, of course, I don't imagine that these filmmakers purposefully chose to make their characters look like the Rothschild family or even bankers at that era rather than any other era. But you have to wonder maybe where the invisible ideas come from in people's heads about what a quote-unquote banker would look like. And I think this is a little bit about what Jon Stewart is talking about, is that it is so invisible to people that their biases towards what a banker would look like tends to be, I hate to say, the Rothschild banking family in the 1700s more than a modern day suit and tie. The point here is that, as Jon Stewart said very poignantly, that there is really no overt anti-Semitism in this film, or by the filmmakers, or even by J.K. Rowling herself. The issue here is that society as a whole tends to show that the stereotypes that exist about the Jewish banker are very much ingrained in our society today. They are ingrained so much that an entire film crew didn't see or think that this might be a little bit of an anti-Semitic trope. And that is, of course, leaving out the Jewish features, the big noses, the accentuated features that are noticeable from Jewish propaganda or anti-Semitic propaganda. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about the history of the quote-unquote Jewish banker stereotype and the anti-Semitism of the Jewish banker. Hang around for the Jewish Diaspora Report.